Welcome everyone to the PJ's Cast. I'm your host Pierce, alongside of my good co-host Reagan. But we have a very special guest today here, joining us from Sportsnet. We have Satiar Shah. How's it going, Satiar?
I'm doing great. How you guys doing?
Doing pretty well. It's pretty well. It's 8 o'clock where I am right now. I live in Alberta, and Reagan
Right.
lives in. You're in the Eastern time zone, right? You're at 10 o'clock right now,
Yeah,
so
I'm over in Indianapolis,
Yeah.
so far
we're up
away
a
away.
little late. Yeah,
Yeah. You guys have late. It's 7 p.m. out here in Vancouver, so not quite as late, but we're getting into the evening time. Yeah.
yeah. Alrighty. So, before we get into any of the questions about the Canucks, I just have to ask you, how was this season covering the Canucks, and kind of how did you get into like doing sports broadcasting and working with like around the Canucks? How did all that stuff start?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it was quite the chaotic and dramatic year in Vancouver, especially with everything with Boudreaux and the coaching change and Bo Horvat getting traded and everything else going on with the organization. So it was quite a bit of chaos this year. So it
Yeah.
wasn't short on storylines to talk about, but at the same time, you kind of wish for a more successful hockey team and not quite as much drama and just more, actual focus on the ice instead of everything else going on with the organization. As far as how I got into hockey, I mean, I've always been a huge hockey fan, and um, when I started in broadcasting, it was because to get into doing something in hockey and sports more than anything else. And this was back in '06, and yeah, I just got in doing some working in AM radio actually, and just kind of doing just music stuff for a bit, and it just kind of worked for a few years in a small market in Edson, Alberta, where I got a chance to actually cover the Edmonton Oilers because it's only 2 hours west of Edmonton.
Yeah,
So
I
we
live in
had,
Edmonton. I know where
yeah,
Edson
you
is.
know where
Yeah,
Edson
yeah.
is, yeah. So I used to come and cover quite a bit of Oilers games. So that's how I got my foot in the door in covering some hockey games. And eventually I moved to Vancouver, and one thing led to another, and I started producing a morning show at Team 10, TSN 1040 at the time. And after a couple of years there, I moved on to Sportsnet 650, and here I host a Canucks show and uh, do TV analysis for the team as well. So it's been a journey that took about 17, 18 years, but it's paid off eventually.
It's well worth the journey for sure. I feel
Yeah,
feel with like a lot of people when you get into broadcasting or radio or that kind of career, you usually start off, small, being like an intern or somewhere, being
yeah,
an assistant of something, and maybe you're doing something you don't really like, but what you kind of slowly move your way up, and then you finally get to nail down what you like. When you have a lot of practice, you get to connect it with people and all that
hmm,
stuff.
yeah. No, absolutely.
So yeah, before we ask you questions about the Canucks, so we're just letting you know we're both Blackhawks fans, so
Yeah,
I feel kind of bringing up like a lot of the off ice stuff. Unfortunately, like the Blackhawks have had
right.
to deal with a lot of off ice stuff the past couple of years, and I guess we kind of understand from the Canucks end of thing. I think there's a lot of similarities between the two teams, with them kind of just being middling, mediocre teams, and the
Hmm.
Blackhawks obviously kind of decided to go on a full on rebuild, and obviously they made a lot of trades, made a lot of moves to make the teams worse, and ultimately they got incredibly lucky
Yeah,
with the lottery. Yeah, like there's no other way to put it, but
yeah.
the Canucks kind of it seems like the same old, even switching over the management and coaching, and you have the 11th overall pick now,
Hmm.
and it's not a bad place to be in, but like to have the 11th overall pick, I suppose, but it just feels like year after year they're not great enough to make the playoffs or make a push for it, but they're also not bad enough to
Hmm.
kind of fall in and get even like a top five pick. So um I just want to ask, like, what do you think the Canucks should do? Because I see one move, like I'll see the Bo Horvat trade, and I'll be like, that's a great rebuilding move. Like, it obviously would suck moving on from a fan favorite, the captain, and Bo Horvat, but you got back a first round pick. You got Achiratu, who's
Hmm.
a decent prospect, but then you flip that pick for Philip Peronic, and again, getting a defenseman, I feel a right-hand defenseman who's kind of in his mid-20s, that's not bad, but I just feel the Canucks would be better off keeping that. I think it was the 17th, 18th pick from Detroit, and just using that to kind of rebuild and choose someone a bit younger.
Yeah, no, I totally understand what you mean. And that's kind of been the push and pull in Vancouver from a lot of the fan base. So the team's been taking shortcuts and always trying to sign some free agents, and they find themselves being capped out, not having a ton of assets, and you kind of get stuck in hockey purgatory. You know, you're not really committed one way or another. You can get stuck there for quite a long time, and Vancouver's been there for a while now. But the one thing I will say, at least with the Bo Horvat trade and getting Philip Hronik's a bit younger, it's a younger player who fits at least with Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes, who are tremendous hockey players. So at least they're targeting the younger right type of players so far, and we'll see if that actually does pay off next season. Because I do understand to some extent, if you have Pettersson, Hughes, and Demko, it is hard to tank unless you trade one of those guys.
Yeah.
So if you're willing to trade, Demko, then sure, we can talk about. You can be bad enough to maybe get a top 5 pick. But as long as you have a goalie like him, and he came back and only played 30 games this year, but he was tremendous down the stretch, and he showed what type of talent that he is. And he's still a player who's 27 years old. So I can understand it's hard to, just trade a player like that and get rid of him. It's hard to get rid of a player like Quinn Hughes, who's 23 years old, 24 years old, 23 years old. And, he has 4 years left on his contract. And then Elias Pettersson, who this year had a 100-point season and is aligned for a massive contract. So it's kind of hard to punt on those players. And ultimately, we'll see if they're making the right evaluation on a player like Philip Hronik. But they're still got to get a lot significantly better. And since they're taking this kind of road and they're not bad enough to get the high draft pick, they can't miss on any of their moves coming up this offseason. Like if they miss on Hronik, for instance, he's not the right player, then they're stuck here for another 4 or 5 years. Then you're forced to trade a player like Pettersson or Hughes.
Because I feel they have like the major pieces down when building a team. Like you have the goalie Thatcher Demko, you have that number 1 defenseman with Quinn Hughes, and Elias Pettersson as the number 1 center. I feel with a lot of the teams, it's kind of the other way around. Like they have, complementary pieces, but they don't have those, kind of franchise altering pieces. But the Canucks are the other way around. They don't really have much to kind of help them out. And I'll give the floor to you, Reagan, because I feel this next question kind of, because they still have the 11th overall pick, and there's a good chance that maybe a player falls potentially.
Yeah. So who do you think is a prospect that the Canucks should target in the draft at 11th overall?
Well, I think it's going to be really fascinating depending on who's going to be available at 11 for Vancouver this year. I mean, there's so many intriguing players, but outside of the top 3 or 4 guys, if you include Will Smith, with obviously Connor Bedard, Fantilli, and Leo Carlson, and we'll see where Michkov goes. But I mean, those 5 guys seem to be in the top 5, and then outside of that, it's kind of anybody's guess, and I think it comes down to what your preference is. But as far as what Vancouver is concerned, they really want to get a higher end center, and they really want to get a defenseman. And I think when you look at that range, whether it's Axel Sandin Palika, or whether it's somebody like David Reinbacher, if either player is available, and there's been some buzz that Reinbacher might go high, even as high as 5 or 6 potentially. And Sandin Palika has been already linked to the St. Louis Blues potentially, who picked number 10 and Vancouver's at number 11. And then there's a guy by the name of Tom Willander, who's really been gaining a lot of steam, righty defenseman who has a very nice, mature game, and he's got some offensive upside as well. He's got some size. I wouldn't be surprised if Vancouver's at 11 and those 2 defensemen go ahead, that the Canucks kind of target in on a guy like that. Otherwise, if a guy like Zach Benson is available, I think he just might be way too talented if he somehow, some way drops down. And if two defensemen go above number 11, I can see Vancouver taking the best player available, like they did last year when they took Lekkerimäki. They had Lekkerimäki, I believe, as high as 8th on their draft board. So when he was there, they ran up and took him, even though they would have preferred to take a center or a defenseman.
I feel like that's what you got to do at the draft, especially if the defenseman goes high. Even if you don't get the defenseman you want, like they're still going to be an elite forward, even if it's not a center. Like again, like a Zach Benson, I feel would be a really good pick for them.
Yeah.
And, sorry. For the next topic, it kind of links in with the Blackhawks and the Canucks. Like another concern with the Canucks is that they do have a lot of money tied up. Like they don't have much wiggle room, and I feel again the Blackhawks are the exact opposite. And I feel like there's been a lot of like buzz, rumblings, whatever you want to call it, between they might like flip the picks like 11 because the Blackhawks have 19, and you know, maybe they take a contract back like a Connor Garland or a Tyler Myers or even a Brock Besser. And I'm just wondering, you know, what's kind of the likelihood or possibility of that happening, and what players could kind of go to Chicago if that were to happen.
Well, I still ultimately think it's something Vancouver will be looking at, is getting creative and shedding cap space. They really want to create cap space. They want to get a third line center. They want to improve their defense, but they're capped out completely. They even, you know, they have to go into long-term injury relief, LTIR, just to essentially sign back guys like Ethan Bear and fill out their roster at this stage. So it shows you there's an immediate need to clear cap space. And because they're in such a poor leverage situation, they're going to have to consider all types of options. And one includes maybe using your draft capital, but trading down to maybe shed a contract. And I'm not quite sure whether Chicago will be willing to actually give up not only 19, but a high second round pick to do so.
Yeah.
I still be surprised if Chicago is willing to do that. But if they were, I would have to believe it's a player like Connor Garland, who has 3 years left in his contract, is actually a very productive hockey player. He's really good. He can put up some points. He just hasn't had that opportunity in Vancouver, because as much as Vancouver has its issues, they have a lot of, you know, wingers on this team and guys who do play with Pettersson and JT Miller, and Garland hasn't been a fit with either player. So he's been forced to play in a third line, but he still produces. Like, he's been one of the best 5-on-5 producers on the team, and he's a player who's a definitely net positive. I can see Chicago being interested in a player like that. He fills some cap space. I think if they want to flip him in a year or two, they can certainly do so. If not, he can help them out. And he's going to be a good player. He's feisty. He gives you a little bit of offense. Maybe slightly overpaid for what he brings, but he's still as a positive type of hockey player. So I would have to believe he'd be the preferred player if I'm Chicago. The other candidates, to a lesser degree, are Brock Besser, although it makes a bit more money, 6.65 this year and next season. You could, however, envision how Connor Bedard, who's a big Canucks fan, watched a lot of Brock Besser. So if you want to appease, Connor and bring a familiar face next to him, maybe you have added incentive to look at a guy like Brock Besser. But the sense we're getting so far is that it's unlikely Besser gets traded. The contract is just a bit too high, 6.65. Again, it's kind of like Connor Garland. He's a good player. He's productive. He can be even better than what he showed last year, but just slightly overpaid. And in a capped out world, he just doesn't have a ton of value on the trade market. And the more unlikely, I'd say, possibility is Tyler Myers. He makes $6 million on the cap, which, hey, Chicago can easily fill that.
Yeah.
He has a signing bonus issue where he gets paid $5 million in the signing bonus payment. So he's getting paid $6 million this year. Now, hey, depends on how willing Chicago is to take that or whatever. But he's a player that once you get to the trade deadline for Chicago, if they retain some money on him, they can easily get a second round pick for him at the deadline. Big righty defenseman. He's close to playing 1,000 games in the NHL in a year or two. Those guys are always coveted. The only issue with Myers is he's overpaid and gets overplayed. But we see throughout the playoffs where guys like him, whether it's been Goodbranson and other teams, Zadorov, you see it in Chicago and past, you see it in other markets. These guys can play and help you out as long as they play suitable minutes for them. You can't ask him to go out there and play 24, 25 minutes and play in all situations, and he's just not capable of doing that sort of thing. I can see him being an asset. I just see that being unlikely. So I'd say going back to Garland, I think that'd be the more likely one. And I think Vancouver's open to it. I'm still skeptical about ultimately how high a price Chicago is willing to pay to do it.
Yeah, because I know they want to move in the top 15. And Vancouver, I don't think would mind the moving back 8 picks or whatever in the first round, especially if it's to pick up another, potentially like picking the like high 30s or low 40s or whatever their picks are at right now. But I just feel Connor Garland just makes almost too much sense because I feel that Brock Besser, they would want to make, I guess, more of a quote unquote hockey trade with him and not it being a cap dump. And Tyler Myers, kind of the same thing as Garland to an extent. I would say more of a cap dump, but I feel Connor Garland's kind of in the middle where he is a cap dump, but you're still getting an efficient player and who's going to help out, because you don't want Connor Bedard playing with a bunch of fourth liners and third liners. You do need guys who could play in the top 6, and even if he doesn't fit into their future plans, like they can flip him at the trade deadline or even retain Sat. Like they have the flexibility to do all that.
Yeah, they certainly do. And I think the thing with Garland too is there's more upside And if he gets the big opportunity, maybe he can do even more than what he's shown so far. He just hasn't really been able to do that in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, kind of past the draft. Reagan, this next question, I'll give this to you. I'll let you take the floor. I think Reagan froze.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. You
There
like
you go.
froze.
Sorry,
You like froze
I-
on the stream. Yeah.
My Chrome like crashed, and I was like, "Oh no!"
Because I like saw your screen. I thought you were just sitting there, and then like look at the bottom. Like, oh, you're in there twice.
No, my like Chrome window crashed, and just like,
Oh,
so sorry about that.
love
Yeah, all good.
So like moving kind of like past the draft, who do you think the Canucks could target in free agency?
Oh, that's going to be interesting. I think their targets are, for the most part, unless they're able to clear cap space, going to be depth type of players. So I think we'll see ultimately how they go. But I think if they can clear enough space, the type of players they go after is a guy like Evan Rodriguez, who's a righty to centerman. It kind of depends on what his price range is. I think Vancouver wants to be in that $3 million range, 2.5 to 3 million. Now, maybe a guy on the lower end I can see them being after is a Teddy Bluger, who Rutherford and Alvin are familiar with from their Pittsburgh days. Good penalty killer, bring some speed, can kind of play that type of role, which the Canucks need on their team. That's the type of market they're playing in. I don't think they're going to be able to clear enough cap space to be after some of the bigger defensemen like Gavrikov, who I think they would like, but I don't think they have enough money to go after. And I think the type of forward, if they had enough space to go after, which they would be Barbashev, who I think really fits the profile of what Vancouver wants in their forwards and wingers. And he's a Dan Milstein client, and the Canucks have signed many Dan Milstein clients over the last little bit, Andrei Kuzmenko, Mikheyev, and so on. So we'll see ultimately. But it just comes down to how much money Vancouver has. And if they don't have enough money to get even Evan Rodriguez, then we're talking about a Teddy Bluger types, perhaps Nola Chari, that's a player like him, if righty to centerman again on a cheap 1-year contract. That's kind of the market they have to play in, unfortunately. It's not going to be an overly exciting free agent splurge for Vancouver this year. It's going to be more about efficiency if they're able to create cap space again, which is, the buzzword I've kept saying numerous times already here.
definitely. The Canucks are just, again, like, they're just so intriguing to me because I don't really know like what direction they're going to. Like, obviously, again, when you have Demko and Hughes and Patterson, and if you can just surround them even with a bit of talent, like, that could really go a long way to kind of help and push and get them into the playoffs. But then at the same time, I just don't think they kind of have that team around those three main pieces to kind of help them not only make the playoffs, but be a consistent contender year in and year out. And obviously, JT Miller is, again, probably the most like interesting part of that to me, because supposedly there was a deal for him to be moved to Pittsburgh at the trade deadline. Do you still think they keep him, or do you think they look to move him if obviously if the right deal is there to move him? Because that's $8 million for 7 years that you get off the books, and obviously he's a great player, but if he can maybe get multiple pieces back for them, I think that would help them a lot and create a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they ultimately will end up trading him, but I do think I kind of put it at about a 20% chance that he gets traded this offseason. I still think the team actually does like him, and down the stretch he played better. Like he had under Tocchet, he did find his game, and he got 30 goals again. He had over 80 points. I mean, there were some issues with his play, but actually for $8 million for a point a game centerman, as long as he plays properly, it's not bad. It's like market. It's not. It's like it's kind of market value for it, and I think he can play at that type of level. And I think they do like him and think he can do better under Rick Tocchet. And I think Tocchet's a big fan of his as well. So I still think it's unlikely they trade him, but I think they're open to it if they're able to get enough assets or the type of player they want. And I think it comes down to getting another young centerman. They don't really have many. Ratu, who they got, we're not even sure he's going to play center ultimately, and he may be a third line center, not really a second line center potentially. They don't really have anybody else who's kind of a succession plan internally to come and be your second line center under Elias Pettersson. So if you're moving Miller, it's going to have to be a move that gives you enough assets to go after a credible second line centerman, or you're getting that type of young player back in return via trade, which I think is going to be unlikely. Because is a team going to trade you a future JT Miller for 30-year-old JT Miller getting paid $8 million for 7 years? And I just think that's unlikely. But I think they're open to anything. It's unlikely it happens, but we'll see. July 1st. Once July 1st comes and goes, that's when his no trade clause kicks in. So the draft's going to have to be the time. June 28th. Exactly 4 weeks from now, we'll find out.
Oh, that's right, 4 weeks. Are you going to Nashville for the draft?
I'm not quite sure yet. It doesn't look like we're going to go to Nashville quite yet, but we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah, because our other co-hosts out here, we're heading to Nashville. We're staying there for 4 days, and then we're going up to Chicago. So we're very, very much looking forward to that. And again, I think the Canucks are going to be hi Stevie, are going to be a team that to watch, because I feel a lot of the teams that, like kind of a tweener team, like you don't know if they're rebuilding or going for it. Those are the kind of teams to watch. And kind of on that topic, besides the Canucks, what are kind of some teams that you're keeping an eye on for the draft and free agency?
Well, I think it's going to be really fascinating to see. Obviously, I think Chicago, because of the number of cap space they have, they're going to be. I think they're going to be involved in a lot of different things via trade that opens up cap space for teams. And the couple of teams that I really am curious about is a team like Buffalo, for instance. They also have a ton of cap space. I think they're very ambitious to build on what they've had. I know Carolina said they want to bring everything back, with the team. I'm not sure it's going to be as feasible, and they're very creative in the things that they do. I think the most fascinating part of this offseason is the number of teams that are trying to create enough space and flexibility to go after some of these players. And ultimately, it's not really a good free agent class. Like, there aren't a ton of higher end players. So I'm not quite sure what's going to happen in that type of regard. But I do know a team like Calgary is also going to be very aggressive and trying to, I think, move a couple of guys. And I think they're a team that would have to be interesting to look at in free agency. And then I do think Nashville is the other team, where Barry Trotz came in today and he kind of mentioned that they want to change their identity, especially in how they want to draft players. And how does that also pertain to how they're going to use their cap space and decisions they're going to make with their team? And I think that's a team really that's going to be interesting to me about how they try to reshape their roster.
Yeah, for sure. Another team to watch out for, I think, is definitely Toronto, just with the GM change, and they're always the center of the hockey universe for a reason, whether that's for good or that's for bad. But having what went down between Dubas and Shanahan, and then hiring Treleving as the new general manager, it's gonna be really interesting, because obviously you gotta decide are you gonna. Because I think Mitch Marner has a no movement clause that kicks in July 1st. If they potentially want to make some work there, you got to do it before July 1st. And then Austin Matthews is eligible for an extension. Same with Nylander. I just feel there's a lot of teams that are kind of in that position. And being Blackhawks fans, I feel like they're going to be kind of not in the center of it, but they're going to be a part of a lot of deals with, taking on cap or whatever, being a third team, taking on more draft picks or whatever kind of thing. But yeah, there's still hockey being played, but I feel we're kind of at that part of the playoffs now where they're on those off days. You see a lot of, you see coaches being hired, you see GMs being hired, and the other way around, fired, a lot of, organizational moves are being changed, but it's probably going to be maybe another few weeks before we see the big trades happen. But ultimately, I'm very excited for the draft. Besides Connor Bedard going first overall and all that, I just think it's going to be a fun week in Nashville and a fun free agency. And it's crazy to think that we're a month away from all this being done.
No, I know it's going to be a flurry. And I do agree with you with Toronto now as well, especially with some of the decisions they've made. And I think Trey Living's a guy that is very active in making trades. And I'm really interested to see if he does make a trade with his former team, Calgary. I know he's coveted Vancouver players in the past as well. And I think everybody looks at Mitch Marner, but I think the easiest thing is to look at Willie Nylander and make that move. And that's what would be my guess. I think for all the talk around Marner, I think Nylander is ultimately the guy they move. And we'll see if they can do something with Matt Murray's contract, because that one's kind of dragging them down a little bit as well, because they need that added flexibility to get rid of that. And we'll see how much they're willing to pay. They gave up quite a bit of draft capital this year already at the trade deadline to make a lot of their moves. So it's going to be really interesting to see if they can do some creative things. But I think Trey Living's certainly a guy who's very active in that regard. And I wouldn't be surprised if Dubas and his situation drags on a little bit. So I don't think he's willing to jump on Pittsburgh quite yet. Mm-hmm. So I think we're still kind of waiting to see where Dubas lands ahead of free agency here. But yeah, it's only 4 weeks away, and these teams that are trying to get their front offices in order don't have a lot of time. No. And a lot of the prep work's already been done by the draft and everything by their scouting departments already ahead of the draft. So that should be all right. But in terms of team building and planning, yeah, time's ticking.
For sure. Stanley Cup Finals start on Saturday. It's the Vegas Golden Knights and the Florida Panthers, and I don't think it's the matchup that really anyone expected. Maybe Vegas, but I don't think anyone would have expected Florida got to this point. And again, it's kind of interesting how trades can go bad or go great. Like in the case of Florida, it's interesting how they finished a point less than Calgary to make the playoffs, Florida make the playoffs, and obviously they made that giant trade. But Matthew Tkachuk is really propelled himself to at least, I'd say, a top 10 player in the NHL right now. And obviously they're getting a bunch of contributions for everywhere. Bobrovsky's been incredible. And then you just look at Vegas, I feel they've kind of almost been under the radar all year. They were first in the Western Conference, I'm pretty sure. And they, took down Winnipeg, and they really shut down the Oilers, and they did the same to the Stars. So I feel you have the team with destiny with, I guess, a juggernaut with Vegas, and I'm wondering what do you think about that series? Like, who do you think is going to win, and what are you looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really fascinated. I'm really interested because one thing I love is the fact that neither team has won a Stanley Cup.
I know. I always like seeing teams, not even just in hockey, but in other sports, having a chance to win their first chance. There's always something so cool about that, and seeing that in hockey, both teams, there's a guaranteed first-time winner. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Vegas hasn't been in the league for long, but you can't deny their excellence. Through so far for as long as they've been in the league. I think Vegas is going to pull it off. That's my guess. I think Vegas takes this in 7 games. I think the way Florida's been going, I don't think they're going down and under 7. That's what I think. If you're losing, you're probably beating them in 7 games. That's the way they've gone. And they do feel like a team of destiny in so many different ways. And that's why I kind of grappled with this, and I keep going back and forth. But I think ultimately, Vegas is going to win. And I think the reason I will pick him is I want to stick with my process of evaluating teams, and that's looking at the teams and looking how they've played. And I just think Vegas is the better team. That doesn't always mean you're going to win, in a series. And, Florida has proven that already with how far they've come and how undeniably they've slayed all these giants in the Eastern Conference. So maybe they slay another giant, and this one coming from the Western Conference. But I'd ultimately have to side and hedge with the Vegas Golden Knights. I just think with how they can play the same kind of style. They have a lot of firepower on the team too. I think Jack Eichel can go toe-to-toe with Barkov. I think Mark Stone is a guy that can challenge Matthew Tkachuk and play a similar style in a different way. So I think they have some direct matchups. I think defensively, I like the edge for what Vegas has with Shea Theodore and Alex Pietrangelo. Clearly, Bobrovsky is the best goalie in the series. But, Vegas has gotten by with Aiden Hill more than fine, right? So we'll see if that holds up. But that's kind of where I would go. How about you guys?
Oh, yeah, you go, Reagan.
I honestly don't know. I can honestly see it going either way. I kind of agree with the fact that Vegas, I feel like, just kind of flown under the radar, and I feel like I didn't realize how good they were. But at the same time, I never expected Florida to make it this far. And the way they just kind of like steamrolled through the second and third round makes you think they have a really good chance. But I do kind of agree. I'm kind of leaning towards Vegas in 7, but I think Florida's going to make it a really good series.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think Florida's not going to go down easily at all. We've seen that, just the way they came back against Boston. They don't play that dominating style, but like they're just relentless. Like they're not going to have the puck more than the other team, but just the way they're so opportunistic, relentless. Obviously, great goaltending, timely scoring, helped them get a long way. But I just look at the way Vegas completely shut down the Oilers in Edmonton and then shut down Dallas in Dallas, and I'm like, I can see them doing that to Florida. But at the end of the day, regardless of who wins, I want to see a Game 7 overtime.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
I want to manifest that into existence, because I've said this the past few years now, and I don't want to say we've gotten duds in the Cup Finals, but we haven't had a Game 7 since 2019 when St. Louis of Boston. That was kind of a dud of a game. Like, I want to see a close. I think it is going to be a close series, but I would just love to see a Game 7 overtime. I feel that the cherry on top.
I think that'd be the most. I love to see it too. I'm with you. I think to see a Stanley Cup final decided an overtime goal, where both teams can win, would be amazing. It's like a golden goal in at the Olympics, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the end of the day, though, I go Vegas at 7. Sorry.
If it goes like overtime, it's just like that one lucky bounce that can make it go either way.
Yeah.
Which makes it fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about Conn Smythe picks? I have Eichel for Vegas, and as great as Tkachuk, I just feel if Florida wins, it's going to be because Bobrovsky's keeping up his play, so I'd go with Bobrovsky for Florida.
Yeah, same. I'd say Bobrovsky. I'd say, you know what? I'd say Tkachuk for Florida and Eichel for Vegas, just to be different. Yeah,
Tkachuk could be easily win it too. Like, he's been incredible, but yeah.
I'm kind of agreeing with Tkachuk because I feel like it's so hard for a goalie to like get the Conn Smythe, but I'd love to see Bobrovsky win it. But definitely Eichel for Vegas.
For sure.
Alrighty, that's about it. Unless you have any more questions to ask, Greg, and we can wrap this up here. Well, it was nice talking to you, Satiar.
Awesome.
Nice talking, obviously, the Canucks about you, but it was also nice talking to you about just hockey in general. So, thank you for coming on, and maybe time down the line we can talk again if the Canucks and Blackhawks do make that trade at the draft.
Yeah, for sure. If something like that happens, we'll chat again. And pleasure being on the show with you guys, Pierce, Reagan. Nice meeting you and chatting, and we look forward to chatting again in the future.
Of course, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.